Welcome into the Big Little Podcast, everybody. This is the March Madness special. I am your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig, as always. Andrew, before we get into all of our picks for this upcoming March Madness bracket 2025, first off, how you feeling now that the tournament is upon us?
I mean, it's always such a great time of year. It's March Madness. Everybody loves it. There's already been buzzer beaters. The conference tournaments were electric. I'm just so ready for March to start tomorrow.
Well, what is March without a Cinderella? So we're going to start with that. We're going to start with the Cinderella pick. Who do you have as yours for this March?
For my Cinderella pick, I have Colorado State going out on a limb here. Actually, they're favored in their first matchup against Memphis in the 12-5 matchup. Fun fact, there's been a 12-5 winner in each of the last couple tournaments. There's always one upset in the 12-5 matchup. So I really like Colorado State this year. They're currently favored by maybe a point and a half, maybe 2.5 points, depending on what book you're looking at. In the second round, they probably play Maryland, if not Grand Canyon. Both of those matchups, I think, bode well for them. They've won each of their last 10 games. They're coming into they finished off the conference tournament really strong by winning their conference. I think that they're carrying a lot of juice into March Madness, and I can definitely see them making it to this week 16. I have Florida. I maybe a little bit of a precursor to what we're going to talk about later, but I have Florida in my final. So obviously I don't have them getting past the second weekend, but Colorado State is a team to look out for. And I mean, if you're going to win 10 straight to come into March Madness, I just think they're going to stay hot.
Yeah, that's a really good pick. I've heard Colorado State. I have Colorado State winning in my bracket as well, at least for the first game. I chose Yale over Michigan. So I have them going to the Sweet 16. I have them also beating Texas A&M. I think they're a really good shooting team. And that is something a lot of people are on. They're talking about it. Texas A&M plays a completely different style of basketball. So that game, you could feel like it could go either way. It could sway. But I think Yale is definitely my pick. I also have VCU to make a run, but I'm worried about that opening game against BYU. But I think after, if they can beat BYU, I think VCU can potentially make a run. I don't know how you're feeling about those.
I mean, it's March.
I know you
Anything can
disagree
happen.
about BYU.
I mean, I have BYU in my Elite Eight, so I definitely can't go as far as to say that VCU beat them in the first round. I mean, it could happen. VCU is a good team, but the fun fact that I was talking about with the 12-5 matchup is that in 33 of the last 39 tournaments, the 12 seed has moved on past at least like the 5 seeds have not swept the first round. So in 33 of the last 39 tournaments, obviously you throw stats out the window like that when it gets to March. But I think if there's going to be one 12 seed to make a run, it's going to be Colorado State. And your picks, I don't want to be too bullish on any different side because I have BYU in my Elite Eight, and you think they're going out in the first round. So
Yeah, what do we know really? Well, part of the reason why I did choose Yale, just expanding on it a little bit more, is while Texas A&M does play a very interesting style of basketball, Yale forces its turnovers or forces its opponents, excuse me, to shoot from behind the arc on nearly 50% of their attempts. So if you're not a team that can potentially push Yale's defense back a little bit or bring them up so then you can potentially get some points in the paint, get some easy buckets, then you're going to have a longer day. And obviously, conversely, like Yale shoots the ball very well. So I think it's just one of those matchups that does actually end up favoring the Ivy League team. A lot of people are on UC San Diego too. So maybe they could end up, yeah, neither of us are on it. We'll get to that and we'll get to that later. But like, maybe that could end up giving them a path to the Sweet 16, right? If they have to beat Texas A&M and then they don't have to go play Michigan, then they have to go play UC San Diego. Maybe that's a more logical path for them to the Sweet 16. Okay, we talked about Cinderellas, but now for the more 50-50 games or less so 50-50 games. I know you had a stat that you wanted to mention about these 8-9 matchups, but we're going to get into each of the game picks. We'll start with Creighton and Louisville. It's been on a lot of people's minds.
yeah, I have Louisville coming out of that game. Louisville is underseeded and like underranked by the committee, I'll say. The fun fact that Pat was mentioning a little bit earlier was that since 2018, number 9 seeds are 16-8 versus number 8 seeds. Again, it's March Madness; anything can happen. But I like we'll get to all the matchups, but I like the 9 seeds to at least go 2-2 in the matchups. Louisville again is they're coming off an ACC tournament where they made it all the way to the final. Nobody was really going to beat Duke, even without Cooper Flag. Duke is a good team and they have depth. I really like this Louisville team. They shouldn't be an 8 seed. They're playing essentially at home in Kentucky, so they're going to have a lot of their fans out there. I think that they'll be too much for Creighton, especially in a down year for the Big East. I don't know that Creighton it deserves a 9 seed, but Louisville shouldn't have been an 8 seed. So I have Louisville over Creighton.
Yeah, I think Creighton is a good team, but as you mentioned, Louisville's probably seated a little bit too low here. If Rain Smith comes back at any point in this tournament, this Louisville team could be really good. I don't know if he's confirmed to be healthy and ready to go for the first round game, but he's averaging 3.5 3-pointers made per game in 30 games played this year, and that's third in the nation. If he can get going, get hot, I don't really see why this Louisville team can't end up making a little bit of a run. Also, Chucky Hepburn, Defensive Player of the Year. This team is completely different than it was last year. It was 8-24 last year, and I like that story. You go for stories in March. I mean, we could get analytical with all the fun facts that we could possibly get, but sometimes you just got a feeling. And I think we're both going to go with Louisville.
Yeah, I think it's
Right?
one of the more
Yeah.
popular 8-9 matchups too that like Louisville is kind of heavily favored by the most of the public. So we're not going out on a limb here, but I mean I think that most people are right that Louisville, especially in what should be more of a home environment, can pull this one out.
All right, let's go to UConn versus Oklahoma, the two-time defending champions versus the SEC team that started out 13-0. Not so much now. Who do you got?
I'm not betting on the two-time defending champions to lose in the first round. I have UConn in this game. They're holding their opponents to under 70 points a game. They're 5-2 in the top 25. Their BPI rank is 16 to Oklahoma's 43. I think that that UConn will pull this one out. I think that they're the better team. Oklahoma obviously went through a very deep SEC conference this year, and every team, I was going to just say, just in general, watch out for the SEC. I wouldn't bet against them too much. They had 14 teams in the tournament, obviously 13 now with Texas losing. That is possibly the best conference of all time. I'm not taking too many teams to be beaten in the SEC, but I like UConn, and you can't really. I personally won't be betting against the two-time defending champions and Dan Hurley, a pissed off Dan Hurley after that dunk in the Big East tournament to lose that game. A pissed off Dan Hurley. I'm not betting against him. I think that UConn pulls it out.
Yeah, maybe one of the more quiet storylines going into the tournament. Also, I just feel like Dan Hurley just seems to always be pissed off. So maybe that's why not everybody is talking about it. Led by guard Solo Ball, who was in the names draft. I don't believe he ended up getting drafted, or maybe he did. I'm trying to think if you ended up
I
drafting him.
took him.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? He might add a little bit of memorabilia to his collection, one being the names draft, the other being a round of 32 participant. I'm going with UConn as well. I just don't think that Oklahoma really has the firepower to compete with a team like UConn. But UConn, they've shown that they can get into foul trouble, and sometimes their three-point defense isn't as sharp as it needs to be. Just all about whether or not Oklahoma can take advantage of that. I believe they shoot 79% from the free throw line, which is top 30 in the nation. That's the angle that I see for Oklahoma, but I think we're on the same wavelength there. I think we're both going UConn. I just can't, in good faith, bet against Dan Hurley and those guys. Maybe next year if they lose this game, right? But not now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in lockstep there. I think that UConn. I just can't see a world where I said it. I'll say it again. I can't see a world where the two-time defending champions get bounced in the first round. So UConn's the pick there.
All right, let's go to Mississippi State Baylor.
Mississippi State Baylor. I have Baylor in this one. It hurts my feelings a little bit to take this one. Norchad O'Meara is one of their best players. He was a former Miami Hurricane, was on that team that made it to the Final Four, but he's been leading that team. He's been averaging 15 points a game. VJ Edgecombe has been really good for them this year as a freshman. Just an overall really good team out of the Big 12. Obviously, one of the tougher conferences. On the other side, Mississippi State. We just talked about not picking against the SEC. I will say, BPI rank, if you put any stock into it, even though Mississippi State is the 8th seed, they're ranked 35th in BPI, while Baylor's ranked 19th. Baylor's had a tough go at it during the Big 12 schedule, but I think that they're the better team. They play really good defense. Norchad O'Meara has stepped up in March for the Hurricanes. Hopefully, he can do it for my pick with the Baylor Bears.
Yeah, so we're the same here. We do differentiate in the next game, but I'm going to go with Baylor as well. I think that the tandem of both of their backcourt duo is just going to be too strong. But where Mississippi State can excel is through the rebounding battle. When they out rebound their opponents, they're 17-4. They're a little bit of a different team, and Baylor's had some trouble against some strong interior players this year. So that is the angle that Mississippi State can win at. And there's a chance in all of these 8-9 games that either team can come out on top. But I just think that Baylor's just going to be too much. And if Mississippi State loses that rebounding battle, they're 3-9. So if that's all I'm going to bank on, I got to go with Baylor. Let's move to Gonzaga, Georgia, where we disagree. Actually, I have Gonzaga going a little bit further in the tournament, obviously, than you do. You have Georgia. Tell me exactly why you're going to pick Georgia today.
I have Georgia for a variety of different reasons. They've won 4 of their last 5 games, and they're one of the hotter teams in coming into this tournament. Just in general, they have a lot of good players. They have a high scoring offense. I think that they can be one of the better teams in March Madness. Obviously, to beat Gonzaga is quite a feat, especially in the first round. So, I mean, I also like the 2-2 for 8 and 9 seeds. So I mean, I'm going Georgia. I know that you feel pretty passionately about Gonzaga, so I'll let you have that.
So I just think that the bracket matches up well for Gonzaga, but let me just say this. I think Ryan Nembhard, great assist man, and I just think that some parts of March are really determined by those floor generals, the players in the backcourt, and they could potentially make a run. That's why I'm backing Gonzaga here. I think Georgia is really good, and they rank top 20 nationally in offensive rebound percentage, top 30 in free throw rate, and they block an absurd 15% of shots. But
I
in the same vein of me picking UConn, I almost don't want to pick against Gonzaga. They're looking to make it their 10th straight Sweet 16.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll have trouble doing that either way because I would have Houston the matchup in the next round. But I mean, I also
Never
wanted to
beating
add on
Houston.
to. I was a little bit brief on my Georgia pick. They beat St.
Okay.
John's earlier on in the. I just wanted to because I know you have
Going
Gonzaga
ahead.
maybe going a little bit farther. So St. John's, they beat them at the beginning of the year when St. John's was initially. They only have a couple out of conference losses. They only have a couple of losses in general. They beat St. John's at the beginning of the year. They have wins against Kentucky when they were 6th ranked, against Oklahoma when they were number 17 in the country. They also beat Florida recently. So I mean, they're taking which was the start of their 4-game winning streak when they won 4 of their last 5 to go into March Madness. Good team, a really tough conference. I think that Georgia finds a way to pull it out against Gonzaga.
We'll just have to wait and see. Let's move to the general first round, the round of 64. There are upsets all the time. That's all we've been talking about practically today, and we're going to continue to do it. A number 15 seed has made the Sweet 16 in each of the last 3 tournaments. We've now seen a 16 seed or beat a 1 seed, and it almost feels shocking. And who calls it? I don't know. It's just a coworker from work who doesn't watch college basketball whatsoever. We're just going to present the question to lead us off here into the bigger, portion of the show where we're talking about upsets. Are there any 16-1, 15-2s that you're looking at?
Not particularly. I'm not the guy to pick big upsets like that personally. I just I'd like to keep my bracket alive as long as possible. So usually I stay away from them. But if there is one to watch out for, I would say Omaha. Omaha is a pretty decent team. They won their conference, and before winning their conference, they started a trend, or every time they win from December 21st on, they've been beating up trash cans, which is a really fun storyline. It made national headlines on X or wherever like social media you're on. A lot of people have seen it where they're beating up trash cans. That not only do the players get in on it and have a lot of fun with it, but assistant coaches do. The head coach is even in on it. So I mean, just a really fun storyline. They score 78 points a game, so they're a high scoring team, a lot of fun to watch out for. And St. John's, in my opinion, is the most vulnerable 2 seed. So if there's going to be a 2 seed or 1 seed to go down, I think it could be St. John's. Obviously, the Godfather and everything that they've brought back to St. John's basketball and New York basketball in general. But I mean, they had a lot of close games in a Big East conference that hasn't been all that good this year. Xavier, who just got into the tournament by beating Texas, but Texas, who's the 14th best team in the SEC this year, took Xavier all the way down the wire, and so did Xavier to St. John's. They took St. John's to overtime in one of the games that they played and kept it close in the second one. I don't know that St. John's is all that good of a team, and I think that if there's going to be any 15-1 a 15-2, 16-1 matchup to look out for, losing, like the higher seed losing, I think it could be Omaha against St. John's.
So I've heard that before. I also think there's just a familiarity with some of these teams. We do see them as the 15, the 14, or even the 16 seed year in and year out. I mean, I recognize Wofford. I recognize Bryant. Some other teams that you might see year in and year out, you might be more likely to pick. I'm in the same boat as you. I did this year kind of just fill out those and just was like moving on. I think it's also because the 1 and 2 seeds this year, I feel like are pretty decently strong, or at least the 1 seed. So I'm separating maybe the 16-1 matchups from the 15-2s, but I feel like they're really strong, and a lot of people are projecting them to go further in the tournament. There's a lot of chalk going on, at least at the very top. And that's why I just don't really see an upset. Another really good indicator is how some of these teams have played against some pretty decent competition. And I have the entire list of how each of these teams have played against top 100 opponents. and none of them have gotten a win except for Norfolk State over High Point, who is also a fairly low seed in this tournament. They won that game by 3 points. Outside of that, there are some close matchups that you might see sprinkled in here, but nothing of note that makes me think, yes, this team can make a run. None of these teams have had a very close game against anybody that's rated higher than Minnesota, which was 87th on this ranking. So I'm going to have to side with you. I don't really know if I see a 16-1 or 15-2.
Don't be surprised just in general if St. John's doesn't make it out of the first weekend. That might be a little bit of a harder take. Obviously, you were talking about the strength of the 1 and 2 seeds this year, but I mean they'd have to play either Arkansas or Kansas in the second round. Obviously, Kansas has been like flailing towards the end of the season, but Arkansas has been pretty solid all season long. Also, St. John's, again, I just mentioned Georgia, and I mentioned the fact that they beat St. John's. Obviously, St. John's on the losing side of that matchup if Georgia won. So I like Georgia finished as the 11th best team in the SEC, at least record wise. And I don't know how you want to look at it. They probably weren't like within that top 8, top 10 like rankings in the SEC no matter what. So St. John's is definitely susceptible to a loss. Obviously, the Georgia loss was a little bit earlier on in the season, but I mean, I could definitely see if there was going to be out of the 1 and 2 seeds this year, like you mentioned it, they're really strong. If there is going to be a team to knock it out of the first weekend, I think it could be St. John's just in general.
Man, you're low on St. John's. We're going to get to that point a little bit later, too, when we pick some of those underperformers. All right, let's move into the upset lock. We just talked about what upsets wouldn't happen. Let's get to your most confident pick for your underdog this weekend.
I mentioned a little bit early on in the episode, so I'm double dipping here a little bit, but
Okay.
Colorado State, I feel pretty confidently in them. It's also a 12-5 matchup, so it's not like I'm picking it's not like I'm picking like a 7-10 or an 8-9 upset. It's still definitely an upset. I have Colorado State as an upset against Memphis. Again, they're favored in that game. You know me, I'm the one who gives out the picks. I do a little picks here and there. So I mean, I like the fact that they're favored. And again, I mentioned the stat that in 33 of the 39 tournaments, there's been a 12 seed to beat a 5 seed. If you look at the rest of these matchups, we'll get to some of the ones that like we'll get soon to one of the upsets that you shouldn't pick. In the 12-5 matchup, I think that this is probably my most confident one, and probably the most confident one for a big one of the bigger upsets, 7 seed difference.
And as I mentioned, I also have Colorado State winning. I'm going to go with High Point. I just mentioned how they suffered a loss to Norfolk State, and also if taking a look at the rest of that list, they were in some pretty close games against some of those teams that were lower on in the seeding in the tournament. But the more that you really start thinking about some of these upsets, the more that they really don't make sense. And that's what makes March so great. I think that there's a story here. Look, the Panthers are first timers in the NCAA tournament. And they've won 14 straight games. Purdue 3-6 over the last 9, and then obviously there's been a clip going around from from PF from part of my take. Excuse me, I almost call them PFT again, but maybe it feels right for them. They have a free ice cream truck to all students. Did you see this? A free steak restaurant where they teach fine dining, and it's like a fine dining learning lab. I think that that's great, and I could totally like wake up by the end of the weekend, or maybe like by the start of the weekend, actually, rather, and just see like a little story on how great their campus looks and how they have free ice cream. And now they're, about to go play whoever in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And it kind of just makes sense. But plus they're hot, and plus Purdue is just kind of cooling off right now.
They're also really easy to root for based off the celebration that they had getting into the tournament. I feel like a lot of people Pat McAfee had to take on this early on in the season. The fact that a lot of people were introduced to High Point, their first time making the tournament, they were introduced to High Point by the fact that they had a huge outburst during essentially their whole stadium was packed out. There was fans everywhere. They were all going crazy. It just meant so much to them to even make the tournament. So really easy to root for. I don't personally have them winning, but if they do, it'd be really great to see.
Yeah, the only issue would be Braden Smith, right, of Purdue, to really just stand in their way if he kind of went off and had a great game and a great 3-point shooting performance. But outside of that, yeah, maybe High Point makes sense. It makes sense to me at least. So I have them as a lock. It might be a little bit of a stretch, but I'm going for it here. I'm going for it.
You got it. It happens. It's March.
It could make it into this next category. We're talking upset picks to avoid. We've mentioned it throughout this March Madness special now at this point. But what games are you looking at and you're saying everybody's on this, everybody wants this to happen? They're rooting for the underdog, not me.
Michigan against UC San Diego. That's got to be the one that everyone's kind of on. Everyone's looking at the Tridents and they're thinking maybe it can happen. Michigan just won the Big Ten tournament. I don't want to sound so matter of fact here, but I mean Michigan is a really good team. They came up with a loss against Michigan State to end their season, and then against the rivals, and then bounce back by winning the Big Ten championship. Michigan is also 10-0 in games decided by 10 or less this season. So unless you think that the Tridents are going to blow Michigan out, which I mean it's March, anything can happen, but they've been in a really good conference. They've in close games. They're practically undefeated. So they are undefeated. So I think that given the fact that they're hot going into the tournament and they're so good in close games, I don't know that the Tridents are going to be able to pull it off. But I know a lot of people are riding high on the Tridents.
Hey, the Tridents. It's a great name.
Mm-hmm.
And they are also making their debut in the NCAA tournament. It's their first year of eligibility. Kind of makes some sense. They take nearly half of their shots from three-point land. They hit 36% of them. Michigan's weakness can sometimes be their shooting woes, just being inconsistent, but they're just too hot. This just doesn't make enough sense. It's on the complete opposite, and I get it. If some of these picks don't make sense, it's understandable. It's March. This one is just a little bit too far out there, and sometimes, we forget that these players hear what we're talking about too. So, like, Michigan is thinking, oh my God, why are people picking UC San Diego to win this game or anything of the sort? Like, how are they going against us? We just won the tournament. And I think at a certain point, you're going to see a team that's got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder when they really shouldn't have had it in the first place. And they're going to go out there and play the same style of basketball that they just played, later in the week last week. Right. And so I just don't see it. A lot of people are calling it. I also, but in the same vein, I have Yale winning in the next round against them. So really, what am I talking about at the same time?
Yeah, another one I just kind of wanted to briefly highlight was Clemson McNeese. I know that that a lot of people are high on the fact that their student manager went viral for having the boombox and knowing all the words to the song. But I mean, Clemson is really good this year. They're 18-2 in the ACC. Obviously, the ACC is down this year, but I have Clemson beating Houston in the Sweet 16. So and making the Elite Eight. So I'm riding high on Clemson. I don't know that they'll get knocked off by a McNeese team. I think that they'll just be too much for McNeese to handle.
Doesn't this just show the beauty of March? Because I agree with you in a sense, right? Because I have Clemson going to the Sweet 16, but I have them losing to Gonzaga, who I have beating Houston. And I think that Clemson is going to beat High Point in the round of 32. So we kind of get to the same place, but just in a completely different way. All right, let's go to the dark horse pick. So separate from a Cinderella, maybe a Power 5 or Power 4 school, Power 5, I guess, we're kind of the Big East. And we're looking at this team. Maybe they're not getting a ton of buzz, but they're not a true Cinderella. We've seen them before. However you want to slice it. Not one of those schools that you've never heard of. They can make a deeper run, perhaps, than what a Cinderella might be able to do.
I have BYU. Obviously, you just said that, like we date back a little bit into the show, and you said VCU is going to beat them. So I mean, maybe not a complete dark horse. A lot of there's a solid amount of people on them, but I mean the way they just play the game of basketball is really fun to watch. They're a really high paced team. They average 81 points a game, and let me find the stat here. They have 6 guys who shoot upwards of 36% from the 6 guys who play over 25 minutes for them that shoot upwards of 36% from the 3-point range. So I mean they're a really good 3-point shooting team. I think that they can overcome a lot. Like they were to play an Alabama team, they could stay right with them scoring wise. They've won 9 of their last 10, and they beat teams like Iowa State twice in that stretch, Arizona, and they beat Kansas by 34 points during that stretch of 9-1. So I think that BYU can carry the momentum. The one loss came in at the end of the Big 12 tournament where they lost to Houston by a significant amount, by 20. So not like riding the highest into March Madness, but I definitely, and that's partially why they are a dark horse, because they just got beat by 20. No one's really expecting them to make a really big run, but I have them going to the Elite Eight. Again, 9-1 over their last 10. They play a really good brand of basketball, shoot a lot of threes, make a lot of threes. So I think that they could definitely make a run.
So this is where I sound a little bit insane here, but I actually think that the East region is a little bit more open than we might think initially. And the reason I say this is just because, yes, Duke is there, but is Duke and Cooper Flagg going to be completely healthy? Obviously, reports are saying that Cooper Flag should be all right at some point in this tournament, and he certainly wants to go out there and play. My thing is, I just don't know for sure, but I have Duke going to the Sweet 16 and beating them in the Sweet 16. I have Arizona, and then I have VCU as my kind of Cinderella story a little bit. Ask me tomorrow, that might change, but I have them then going to the Elite Eight, beating St. Mary's. So I have Arizona going very, very far in this tournament. I just think that they're very well rounded. They're one of the best 2-point shooting teams in the country. And I think that that kind of gets a little bit overlooked when we're looking at all the 3-point shooting teams in the tournament. And sometimes you don't get those 3-point shots to fall. I think Arizona can rely on some of the big guys that they have down low. They have a trio: Caleb Love, Jaden Bradley, and KJ Lewis. They're all capable of playing really good basketball when you really need them to. And they make shots from the free throw line. So they got a little bit of that March, check box, right? One of the things that you're looking for. The big thing that I'm looking at is how they defend the 3-point line. I don't know if that region, that East bracket or the East region in the bracket, is going to be enough to expose them. But look, if Cooper Flag is ready to go and ready to play, I don't know if I'm picking Duke to lose to anybody, right? Like, it's Cooper Flag and it's Duke, and maybe talk to me when they get to the Final Four. But right now, as it currently stands, I got Arizona as my dark horse. And then obviously we mentioned Gonzaga a little bit earlier. I have Gonzaga going very far, but I got my eye more on Arizona. I think that they could be really sneaky.
Yeah, I like Caleb Love in March Madness. I know he gets a lot of hate, but I Arizona's been a good team. I think they're 9th in BPI right now. They are a good team. I personally don't have them making it as far as you do, but I know like there's like some experts that have them in the Final Four. So I mean, if there's going to be a dark horse pick that I don't think that sounds all that bad, I think Arizona could be one of them.
Well, we're kind of inching our way towards the Final Four. Let's just go all the way to the championship game. Who do you have winning it all?
If Cooper Flag is healthy, I think that Duke has a really solid shot. They're sitting at plus 280, the lowest. They have the lowest odds to win the national championship, and that's given the fact that the odds makers obviously factor in injuries into how they predict their odds. I think that they have a really solid, I think that they have a really solid shot. They're just a really deep team. They won the ACC without their best player. If Cooper Flag is in for them, I think that they're the best team in college basketball, and they've kind of been floating around the 2-3 all season long, but they kind of solidified their spot as the number 1 team in the nation towards then with Auburn losing a couple games to close out the season. I think that Duke is just going to be too much to handle for anybody else. You'll touch on it, but there's other number 1 seeds that are really good in this tournament, and it's March, anything can happen. But I think that going 19-1 in your conference, winning so many different games, having so many blowouts, they have one of the best point differentials in all of NCAA basketball this season. I can't go against Duke, especially if I think that Cooper Flag will be at least close to 100% by the time the round of 32 rolls around. I'm like, for the sake of my pick, I'm low key hoping, even though John Shire was saying that he thinks that Cooper Flag will be ready to go for the round of 64. I don't think that they'll need him. So if they could keep him out for another game and kind of just give him the extra 2 days of rest. And maybe just give them the extra 2 days of rest for the round of 32. I think that they could be pretty set.
Yeah, there are a lot of really good 1 seeds this year, and 2 of them I'm looking at outside of Duke because I just don't know if Cooper Flag is going to be healthy. But I mean, I guess if he's ready to go, then maybe everything is thrown out the window. But definitely want to give some love to Auburn and Florida. They are 2 teams that I have going deep into my bracket, and I don't really think that they should be overlooked, and nor do I think that they're on 1-8, 1-9 upset watch. I have Florida winning it all. Obviously, Walter Clayton Jr., they just got off of an SEC tournament run, 30-4. Every NCAA champion since 1985 has reached at least the semifinals of their conference tournament, so that checks off. I mean, for most of these teams, it does still because they are the number 1 seed, but definitely felt like that should be noticed and recognized. I think Florida's just start to finish has been so good, and they have some great wins over some really top-tier opponents. And I know a lot of people are really not trying to hear how great the SEC is this year, but I really think it's something worthwhile. And they even got a win over UNC 98-84. And as I mentioned, I think they could get hot. They've been a little bit up and down, but they gave Duke a couple good games there. So they got wins over Tennessee, 2 of them. I mean, they beat Bama twice. They beat Auburn. I like them. I think the only thing that I'm worried about is their free throw percentage, 71%. But outside of that, I think they can hold off and withstand some of the pressure from the other teams. And as I mentioned before, I think when we're looking at some parts of this bracket or some parts of this tournament, I think Florida's also got a pretty decent path too. Because if we're counting St. John's as one of the lesser 2 seeds, and we're thinking that part of the bracket might blow up a little bit, and we got Colorado State as the 12th seed, maybe they give a game to Maryland, or maybe Grand Canyon beats Maryland or something. I think that's a really good path for them. I think the struggle might be whether, like, what kind of game UConn ends up playing. But like I said, I don't see a 1-8, 1-9 upset for them. I just think that's too early. This team is too good. So I got Florida going pretty deep, and I got them winning it all.
Yeah, you look at a team that goes 6-0 non-conference. They crack 30 wins in the best conference of like potentially all time. I don't think that Florida can be discounted at all. If Duke were to win the championship, I'd have them, like, in my personal bracket, I've been facing Florida in the national championship, and it being I mean, I don't have a score prediction, but like I think it'd be all of a pretty close game. So I think that Florida is one of the best teams, and was one of the best teams all year in one the best conference of all time. So I don't think that Florida or Auburn can be really discounted.
God, that would be an absolute treat to see that final.
Yeah,
That would be amazing. But
agreed.
all right, well, we kind of got to the pinnacle. Let's take a step back here. We're going to talk about the underperformers. So maybe the opposite of dark horses, but also the teams that you might expect a little bit more from, not just picking upsets here, but also kind of picking some more upsets. What are some teams that you're thinking that you're looking at that might not be able to play up to their seeding?
I'll start with St. John's, but I have a second one.
Thank
Obviously,
God.
yeah, right. I mean, I've been harping so much on St. John's. They're gonna make the Elite Eight, and I'm just gonna look like a fool. But I mentioned it earlier on. I think that there's a very real chance that they don't get out of the first weekend. Obviously, they have between Coach Cal and the Kansas team. They're gonna have a hard matchup no matter what in the second round. I think that the St. John, I'm not going to call them fraudulent. They've had a really good season, but I think that they could definitely be one of the underperforming teams of the season. And then I also have Maryland as one of my possibly teams that, like, they're a 4 seed. I mentioned Colorado State earlier. Their path to the Sweet 16 would be through Maryland. I think that they'd be able to do it. Obviously, Maryland has had a really good season. They have guys like Derek Queen, who's been averaging 16 points a game. Gillespie's been averaging 14 points a game. They've had a really strong Big Ten season, but I think that Colorado State could possibly pull the upset there, and that's not to say that they haven't had a good season. They can't do it, but I mean, I think that they could be one of the underperformers. They're averaging over 80 points a game while also giving up less than 70 points a game. They're 5-5 versus the top 25 this season. BPI has them ranked as the number 4 team in the country. So I think that there is a path where they get out of the first weekend and into the Sweet 16 and maybe even beyond that. But I could definitely see them losing to Colorado State in the second round, and I have Colorado State pulling the upset in that one. So that's my two personal underperformers.
There's a few top teams that don't fit the criteria that everybody looks at every single year for Final Four teams. It's the top 50 in both adjusted offense and adjusted defense. Those teams are St. John's, Kentucky, Purdue, Missouri, and BYU, 65-56, 63-73, 68. You get the point, okay? We've mentioned some of these teams, obviously, before. St. John's has been mentioned now 100 times. And I hope, for my own sake, I'm getting caught in the crossfire here. I don't even have them going out that early. I hope they go out now pretty early just for the sake of your pick. But Kentucky, Purdue, Missouri, and BYU. I have BYU going out a little bit earlier. You have them in the Elite Eight. Missouri, I have them going a little bit further. I believe I have them in the Sweet 16. I'm trying to double check right now. And going down, I have them beating Texas Tech. So, and then I actually have them beating St. John's. But that's a matchup between two teams. And then I have them losing to Florida. So I have them in the Elite Eight. So these are teams that we're watching out for and taking a look at. Obviously, my team is Purdue. I just don't really see it right now. I think they do get bounced in the first round.
And to put a bow on St. John's, I have them in my personal bracket. I'm making the Sweet 16 and losing to Missouri as well. So I don't know. Like, I'm not putting this out there as something that it's a definite, but it just wouldn't shock me. I feel like they're one of the weaker 2 seeds in this tournament. So I mean, they've had a great season. The Big East is just like a little bit fraudulent just in general this season. They've had a really down year, and St. John's kind of taken advantage of that. They have some like out of conference losses that they probably. I mentioned Georgia lost already like 3 times this show, but I mean, they've had some trouble with SEC and out of conference play. So I think that Missouri could give them some trouble if Missouri even makes it that far. But that's just putting a bow on it. I have St. John's in my Sweet 16. I just think that they could if there's any 2 seed that I'd be looking to go down, St. John's probably it.
So I'm glad that you mentioned just the 2 seed part. I have Tennessee losing to Kentucky. They lost to Kentucky twice this year. That is a team, I think, specifically for this topic that I did want to mention. They defend the three. I believe this is like the best in the country. 27.6% are the opponents shooting for the 3-point line against Tennessee. I think that if a team can just withstand that, I think that this team could go down, and I think that team is going to be Kentucky. I don't have Kentucky losing in the first couple of rounds. I know they kind of were trying to get over that for a while. I don't think they've been out of the round of 32 in however many years. I think it's been a minute. So they're kind of susceptible to that. Yeah, Jack Golke, man. Well, legend. But yeah. I think if they can avoid that trend that's been happening over the last handful of years, I think they match up well with Tennessee, and I think Tennessee goes down pretty quickly after the first weekend in the Sweet 16. But as many might say, you don't know ball if you choose blank team to win the national championship. We're not saying it so definitively this go around, but what's a bad champion pick?
Okay. You framed it in a way where it's gonna sound really bad, but I have Houston as the team that could be one of those teams where every single year it feels like Houston is one of the prohibited favorites. They're always getting a 1 seed recently. They're dominating their conference. They step into the Big 12. They dominate that conference. But I just don't see it. I think that they are the worst number 1 seed, even if technically Florida was the last number 1 seed. I definitely, if there was a Florida versus Houston matchup, I'd definitely take Florida. Something about there's March Madness is about vibes. I don't feel the vibes with Houston. They're also just not like that fun of a team to watch. Like if out of any of the number 1 seeds, all of them would be a good matchup. Houston just wouldn't be. Like they're not like they score points. They average 74 points a game, but like their calling card is that they play really aggressive defense. They only average, the opponents only score 58 points a game on them. So I mean, like it just wouldn't be fun. And that's kind of what March Madness is about. So I think that every year Houston has a 1 seed, and the last couple of years Houston has a 1 seed. And they always play really well, but they come up a little bit short. And what I do is I fill out 25 brackets on ESPN every single year, right? For like the last 4 or 5 years. I double down on the 1 seeds a couple different times so that one of the brackets is actually good. I only have Houston in one of my brackets out of 25 because I just don't see it happening. So if they do, I was correct on one bracket, the other 24 is screwed.
So we're on the same page here. I'm not going to present a different team. I'm going to harp on Houston a little bit. I think what really worries me is for a national champion, you have to win all those games, and you have to go through the Cinderellas that pop up, the dark horses, the true national champion contenders, and then you get to cut down the nets the last time. As the 317th ranked free throw shooting team in the nation, I don't think that is possible. And I think it's that simple. They are a good 3-point shooting team. They cannot hit a free throw to save their life. I think that that's too much. And I also, when I look at their bracket in the Midwest, I know that's probably considered not exactly the most competitive. I think we're looking at some of the other regions is more competitive, but I really respect Gonzaga. And what does Gonzaga do? They shoot free throws really well. And I actually really respect Clemson. I think that they're a good team, and I think they're getting overlooked. You have a little bit of smile on your face. How early?
I have Clemson beating Houston, so I'm right there with you.
So it was a smile of agreement. Well, we're in agreement there. I think you got to give some respect to Clemson. I think they're a really good team. I think either or, whether or not they play in the round of 32 and they lose to Gonzaga, or if they play in the Sweet 16 and lose to Clemson, I think both of those are happening, and I'd be very surprised if Gonzaga were to make it to the Elite Eight. And then maybe talk to me, because then they would be playing Kentucky in my bracket. Maybe it's Tennessee, maybe it's a Cinderella, and I just don't know if I see them going all the way. So I think we're on the same boat as Houston. All right, well, before we get out of here, I did want to give you the floor to say any last little stat, factoid, anything that you may have missed for this March Madness special, because it's kind of a speak now, forever hold your peace, because we're actually on the March Madness opening day now. It's past midnight, so it's past March Madness Eve.
My final little factoid is first of all, love March so much. It is what a time of year it is. You kind of can just soak in, especially during the round of 64 and round of 32. if you really wanted to, you could just spend 12 hours on your couch, not move, and just flip the TV and have one game on, then the next game on, the next game on, the next game on. It's just a wonderful time of year. The last thing I'll say is Iowa State. I didn't really get to touch on them at all, but they were really good in the Big 12 this year. I really like them. They score 80 points a game. They give up less than 70 points a game. I've been using that statistic a lot during this episode. They're only 4-5 against the top 25 this season, but the Big 12, even in a down year, it's still a good conference. BPI has them ranked as number 7 in the country. Auburn has been a little bit down going into March Madness, and I personally have Iowa State coming out of that region, beating Auburn and Michigan State and making it to the Final Four. So that's my last little in my bracket. That's the last kind of thing I wanted to harp on.
Well, my comment is just going to be less about the teams and just more so reiterating your point about March. This is what paid time off is for. This is why it was created. So take it over the next 2 days, because I don't really know if there's too many other days outside of this that are better in the calendar year. So it's certainly a lot of fun. But thank you so much, Andrew. This was actually just so much fun, this whole March Madness special. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been the Big Little Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig. We'll see you guys next time.